Welcome to This Week in Jacksonville Plus, something for our streaming viewers, in addition to the conversations from our show that airs at 9 a.m. Sundays on Channel 4. So this is special content that you only see here on News 4 Jax Plus. Pastor John Allen Newman, leader of the Sanctuary at Mount Calvary Church in Jacksonville, also one of our longtime political contributors here on News 4 Jax. So, John, this is a topic I'd love to hear more from you about, and in this venue we can just have a conversation rather than a really short news story.
Right.
Diversity, equity, inclusion. This is something that it seems like is maybe misunderstood, and I know that you're actually leading some training for some organizations. Give us just the broad view, and then let's dive deeper. What is diversity, equity, inclusion, and how does that connect to some of these laws that we've seen passed in the state of Florida that may not be really connected to that?
Sure. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is getting a bad name these days. It's being used as a political dog whistle. And unfortunately, because oftentimes, and this is not in any way pejorative or negative towards voters, but people who are paying their bills and raising their kids and living their lives may not be high information voters or citizens because they don't have the time.
Yeah.
So when someone throws something out, particularly if there's a particular political proclivity towards the thought system that they're trying to promote, then it becomes a catch-all. Like CRT has become a catch-all. DEI now has become a catch-all. That means everything I don't like about whatever the political space is.
Well, put it in the catch-all.
Yeah.
I don't like it. It's part of that.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a label. I'm putting it in.
Now I can dismiss it, intellectually because it's a bad thing. But if you ask someone to define it, like they were asking before about CRT, well, what is CRT? And most folks who are saying, I don't want it, can't define it. It's like an unto the time when people are saying, well, I don't like Obamacare. Well, what about the Affordable Care Act? Oh, that's great.
Right.
Okay, so I make my point.
That's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and I have the privilege of being on the instructor staff at Howard University in the School of Business, an executive instructor in DE&I. And I've had the privilege of teaching and instructing actually a Fortune 100 company. I will not name them, but it's been a great experience, and others as well. And what it really means is, in the history of this country, there have been people who have been excluded from being a part of the whole process of making us a more perfect union. And so how do we address that? How do we address, since we have a diverse nation, to make sure that kind of representation is available in the workspace, politically, everywhere, particularly in institutions? And so it affects the private and the public sector, of course. But diversity, equity, inclusion has the misnomer that means persons who haven't been at the table are going to take the seats from those who have been at the table. So now the folks who have been there and have used to being there, they have to leave and give up their seat for somebody who hasn't been there. It's not what it means at all. What it means is, if you take the table paradigm, the table has had 10 seats. Yeah. And those 10 seats have been occupied by the same folks, even though they may change the faces, but demographically it's basically the same. And what they're saying is, no, let's get a bigger table with more seats available so everyone is at the table. You cannot have diversity, equity, and inclusion and exclude. It's oxymoronic. Right. And so most folks who have a negative opinion about it are thinking, oh, all that diversity stuff, that means that now I got to give up my seat because you're going to take my place. No, it's not that at all. It means allow somebody else to sit at the table and enjoy and interact and create synergy and serendipity and everything else that happens when people get together and make institutions better.
Well, I've heard some of the pushback. Well, it's not as easy to manage when you got 20 people at the table instead of 5 people at the table. But having more voices there, there's some power in that, right? Having more of the experience that those 5 people wouldn't, because they don't have the same kind of experience and live in a different kind of culture or world or whatever. Is that part of the training that you do with these organizations?
Sure it is. And here's the magic that takes place. It's amazing, though, there are different existential lived experiences that do come to the table, as you said. But here's what happens in the midst of that. As people are telling their stories, they find common ground. They find that, yes, this wasn't exactly the path I came, but I've been hurt too. And someone else says, oh, I didn't recognize that this was offensive and harmed somebody, and now I understand why it does. And you'll have conversations and have people saying things such as, oh yeah, I agree with that. And then somebody else will say, wow, now I understand that perspective better. And people find common ground because they come together, cross-pollinate with ideas, intellectual conversations, and come to find out we have more in common than separates us. But when you don't have conversation, when people are not at the table, you don't get an understanding that there is, even in the diversity, there's a lot of commonality. Now what I have to go on is what? Innuendo, rumor, gossip, or just a small circle with whom I have conversations with who help me define that reality in that space of DE&I. But when you actually allow it to happen, you get a cross-pollination of ideas, experiences, and you come away with a common understanding. We're all in this thing together. Yeah.
So when it comes to those labels, you mentioned earlier CRT. So somebody might even know that CRT, okay, critical race theory, but not understand what that is. That's kind of the same space that DE&I is.
Yes.
How do you feel? How does it land for you with some of the laws that we've seen passed in the state of Florida or other places that say, if you support DE&I in that state institution, then you're going to lose your funding, or we're not going to support you, you can't do it. How does that sit with you?
I think there's a lot of hypocrisy there. For one thing, you can't be a conservative and believe in small government and then Bigfoot, institutions, schools, businesses, because you don't like the things that they're teaching. What schools are supposed to do is not tell people what to think or believe. What schools are supposed to do is challenge people to learn how to think strategically and intellectually and critically. How can you have critical thinking when you leave certain components out that make up the matrix of a critical thinking enterprise? How can you do that and get the result that you need? You can't. And so when you pass bills saying, well, DE&I, we're going to defund that, it dies on the vine, almost quoting the governor directly. When you decide with certain things that are not going to be taught in terms of the schools, in terms of the history of slavery, when you can actually say that Rosa Parks didn't really give up her seat or refuse to give up a seat, because of racism, it was that someone told her, we need you to move. When you do that to history, when you, not to be, not to whitewash it, I don't know a better phrase to use, no pun intended, but when you do that, Kent, you harm students from knowing the whole story. And listen, every successive generation basically comes behind us to fix the stuff we messed up. How can they ever do that if they don't know the whole story? And when you enact laws that stop people from learning the truth about slavery, it was not a war of northern aggression. It was not simply about, we just believe that this is our way of life. This was about owning people. Chattel, you could own them. You could own their parents and their grandparents. Listen, it's close to me. My mother's great-grandmother was a slave. So it doesn't go very far back for me, and it's real. So yes, the laws that are being enacted are extremely harmful to helping our students be in a place where they can think critically and learn how to make adjustments and changes to what happens in our community and our state.
And if anybody says, hey, I would love for that, the racial issues to be solved, well, it's going to happen through those young people who are coming up right now.
Absolutely.
Pastor John Allen Newman, you and I enjoy talking a long time, but we're probably going to wrap it up here.
Right.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate sharing some of your thoughts there. And you can watch more in-depth interviews like this one, in addition to the show that airs on Sundays at 9 a.m. on Channel 4. This is special content. You'll only see it here on News 4 Jax Plus.